Right, hello, Dread Mechanic here again. Today I am going to do a quick little tutorial stream that I'm dubbing my research and development streams. Today I'm going to show you how to do, or at least the way I do, subgrid wheel control without having to use a script. This system will be particularly helpful to console players, and as anyone that's played on PC will be familiar with, here I've got Whip's, or Whiplash's Subgrid wheel control script, which is a fantastic little script. It does lots of cool things. Well, it does a very simple cool thing. It makes wheels work across subgrids. And the way it does that is by manipulating overrides on things. So as you can see at the bottom of the screen there, I have set up all the wheels so you can see the propulsion overrides. And what the script does is converts user input, like keyboards or controllers, if you're using a controller on your PC, and turns them into propulsion overrides for the wheels. So forward makes them all go forward, back makes them all go back, left and right adjust these steering overrides. It should be important to note that wheels, whether they are a left wheel or a right wheel in the item description and their visual appearance, they are all still the same. They all still run in the same direction. The wheels spin clockwise and anti-clockwise. So you can see all the wheels on the left are positive 60% propulsion, and all the wheels on the right are minus 60% propulsion, and it's the opposite if I go in reverse. So you've just always got to remember that your left wheels go forward, your right wheels go backward. But that is how that script works. And the vanilla version that I've been working on relies, as always, on my favourite block, the event controller. And rather than pre-build anything for this little tutorial, I'm going to show you how I put it together. So if we want a forward and backward direction, at the very least we need a forward and backward event controller. So we'll stick one there for forward, one there for backward. We'll call that controller forward. For that one, controller reverse. And if we want to be able to steer, we will also need another two for left and right. So let's pop one there. Controller left, and call this one controller right. Now, those event controllers are gonna be part of our trigger system, but in order to have something to trigger these blocks and do what we need, get them to do what we want to do, we need thrusters, because they are the one and only block that is available in the event controller that can translate keyboard input into actions. Everything else is a block that does stuff, that turns on and off or reacts to other stimulus, other whatevers. Whereas with thrusters, we can use these to trigger the event controllers, which will in turn trigger the wheels. So we'll make that drive thruster forward. And we will also name it control, because when you are using thrusters to trigger event blocks, you have to bear in mind that grid movement will set off the thrusters and the inertial dampeners. So if we pop 2 on the front there, and 2 on the back, 2 on the front, as I drive forwards and backwards, and as I turn, the thrusters will fire and they will do stuff on their own. And that will cause the event controllers to react in unwanted ways. And the best way to get around that is to stick a little bit of override on one of the thrusters on the axis that you're working on. So if we give that one a little bit, you'll see all the other thrusters on that axis now stop. If I pop one on the other side, left and right, they'll do what they want to. They're active. These have all basically stopped because of that one at the front being on override, and the others will now only fire when we want them to. So, with that in mind, we'll have forward control. We will have forward override. You actually only need one override controller on each axis that you are working on. And you'll also notice that if I turn off this script, thrusters by themselves, or at least one small thruster by itself, put that on a little bit of override, isn't really enough to move this thing on its own, because they're only tiny little thrusters, so they won't affect your movement capabilities all that much. Or, if you'd like a little bit of thruster boost, you can use a bigger one. But I use the little tiny ones because they don't really do much when you're playing with huge, great, big, stonking things like this. Because this thing has entirely vanilla wheel control systems. It turns left, it turns right, because I've set it up to have proper tank track controls. It can go forwards, it can go in reverse, and it even has a handbrake, which I use with the spacebar, and it's all vanilla. And I'll show you how to do all those sorts of things. So, we've got a control thruster for forwards, we've got an override thruster, which means we technically only need one thruster for our reverse control. And we'll call that reverse control. Hey, now, in order to get these things to do stuff, we need to select our forward controller, select the thruster event, select our forward control, stick it over 50, that's what I usually do. That way any little flickers aren't really going to do much, and you have to go at least over full power to drive forwards, which is usually the case. So, when that pushes forwards, our forward controller wants something to do. So what it needs to do is it needs to increase the propulsion override on all of these. And as you can see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. There is only 9 slots in here, and increasing it by 1 isn't gonna do an awful lot. Increase the propulsion by 1 increment and go forwards. There you go, you can see that is now turned on to 10%, and it's only going to go 10% because it goes 10% with each increment. As you can see, each time I tap that forward controller, it goes up a little bit more. So what we actually want is, we want to put a timer in there, but before we do that, the other side of the action will eventually be reset propulsion override, so that when I press forwards on the controller, it drives the wheel forwards, and when I let go, it resets the propulsion and turns it off. And that is the basic idea behind it. There you go, that's me pressing W key on my keyboard and then letting go. You can see the event controller reacting to it. But 10% power ain't really enough. We want a little bit more than that. So we will chuck in a timer block. We will have a timer block for forwards and a timer block for reverse. And I'll stick them there and there so we can see what we're doing. So that can be drive forward. That can be drive reverse. You know what, I'll also stick the word drive in there because it'll make it a bit easier, because we're going to have a drive setup and a steering setup, and they are going to be 2 separate systems. So we go to drive forward. All we need to do is select our suspensions, and it helps to remember what's what, because like I said before, left side wheels increase propulsion to go forward, right side wheels decrease propulsion to go forward. So what we need to do is select increase, increase, increase propulsion, and increase propulsion on all of our forward wheels. All of our left-hand wheels, rather. So we'll do forward, left, and right. Increase. Where is it? There we go. Yeah, and front and rear right. Increase propulsion. Increase propulsion. And then we've got right here. You increase and increase. Right. So that should do all of them. Then we just need to set this timer to trigger itself. And that way, if we trigger it, it will drive all of those wheels straight up to 100%. And as you can see, if I press that thruster now, you can see the suspension trying to reset itself, but it's fighting against that trigger, constantly triggering itself. So what we also need is another timer to stop it. And that can just be called drive stop. And that will be as simple as selecting all of those same wheels, and it doesn't matter what order, and you just want to reset the propulsion on all of them. fact, the first thing you want to do actually is stop that timer and turn it off. Then you want to reset all the proportion. So now if we trigger that, it turns everything off and stops it all. That is now turned off. Turn that back on, trigger it, goes up to full power. Trigger that one, stops, goes back to 0. And that is forward. So if we stick those timers on our drive control, we'll have the drive forward turn on and turn off when we push the W key and release it, and then it will trigger it when that thruster is firing, and then we want the opposite way around for the stop. When we fire the thruster, it turns off that timer so it can't do anything, and when we release it, it turns it on and triggers it. And in theory, we should be able to drive 100%, stop, and there you go. That is the forward direction. Although I think I've messed something up there, because that's saying 100% across the board. What have I done wrong? I have. Yeah. Oh, hang on, I was looking at the wrong wheel. Right hand side, propulsion override. Yeah. Yep, like a fool, I've done it wrong. Drive forward. What have I messed up? Oh yeah, I've just increased everything like a fool. Didn't even listen to my own instructions, so... yeah, decrease all of the right hand side, increase all of the left hand side. There we go. If we go and look at our script controlled one, everything on the left hand side is going forward, everything on the right hand side is going in reverse. There you go. That's the way we want it. So yeah, that is our forward drive. Then we just need to do the same for reverse. So we do drive reverse. And what we want to do is suspension and do it right this time. So everything on the left now wants to go in reverse, so we decrease the propulsion. Increase and decrease. And everything on the right hand side we want to increase the propulsion. And there we go. And for the reverse controller, we do it pretty much exactly the same as the forward controller. 150, greater than, drive, so we want reverse, on, off, trigger, off, on, alternate trigger. So now we can go in reverse, and we can go in forward. We will do a quick little test. And there you go, that is forward, and that is reverse. Burning a little bit too much power, but that can be solved with more batteries, because it's now got all of these extra controllers and timers, and you can see them all firing away as I press buttons. So, there you go. That can drive forward and backward. Now we need to do the same thing with the turning controls. So we will need to do the same thing. So another timer for them each. And we'll bung one on the back for the turn stop. That could be turn left. Turn right. And turn. In fact, probably call it steer, really. It's steering technically rather than turning. So yeah, we'll call it steer. Too many E's. That controller can be steer left. Oop, wrong thing. That can be steer right. So again, we're going to need a couple of thrusters. Now, with left and right, obviously, you only need, as I explained before, you only need one override controller on the axis you're trying to set stuff up for. But obviously, sticking two thrusters on one side and one on the other might offset the weight of your vehicle, mech, car, whatever you're designing. So I, for balance sake, tend to put two on either side. And have a steer thruster right. Because when we're steering, right is on the left, left is on the right. It'll get confusing. That gets to be control. Copy that. Copy all. Copy that to there. Call this one override. And then we'll give it a little bit of override. Over here, we'll call this one left. Oh, hello, Dr. Headbonk. Greetings. And over here, we'll call that one override as well. Give that a little bit of override. Give that a little bit of override. And steer. Now. Go. Right, so now I've got left and right thrusters that will control our steering system. So control left will be the same more or less as the drive systems. It'll be thruster triggered over 50%. We will use our steer left controller, and it's going to be, oh no, these aren't going to be feet, Dr. Headbonk. This little stream I am demonstrating how I build vanilla subgrid wheel control systems. This is just a basic setup. This isn't going to be anything. This is purely for the purposes of this demonstration. Yeah, like I said, I'm literally just showing other people how I make vanilla subgrid wheel control systems, so you don't have to rely on things like scripts, because there's a lot of console players out there that struggle with things like this. I've done all the mech stuff like this. It was actually building a mech with this system in mind that inspired me to do this little stream here. But yeah, back to what I was talking about. The steer controller. We want to do the same thing that we just did with the drive wheels and increase the steer override and reset the steer override. So that you can see a little tiny bit as I push that thruster, you can see that wheel just moving, just the tiniest bit, and you can see there at the bottom of the screen in the first slot of the toolbar it's moving by 10%, and that ain't very much, and we've got a lot of wheels we need to move. So this is why we set up that steer timer. So, steer left. Oh yeah, we'd also like to just check. Steer control, left, actions. So that's the front left wheel. The front right wheel will almost certainly need to decrease steer override, I would imagine. Yeah. There you go, you can see it moving over every time we press that. And that would also need its own reset. So if we reset the steer override there, press left. Ah. Right. So the suspension also wants to decrease, doesn't it? Yeah. So that's that's the same across left and right, obviously, because the angle it's on. Right. So decrease steer override is left, increase is right. So what we need to do is steer left. We need to set this with all of our suspension, and we need to get all of the front wheels to decrease their steer override. And it'll be a case of the rear ones wanting to increase, because we want them to spin opposites to each other. So, if I've thought about this correct, it should be a case of, oh, hang on, then we need to get this timer to trigger itself. So if I hit left, oh, I also need to change that. So it'll take that off, take that off, take that off, take that off. Steer left trigger on, off, trigger. So if I hit the left key now, there you go. Everything is turned the way it should do when like a wheel control script. If I turn left, all the wheels turn the same way that that is now. There you go. That's the script controlled version. This is the vanilla version. And we need that steer stop to reset the, like I said before, we need to stop things first. So we will want those two to stop, turn off. Then we will want all of our suspension to reset steer override. There we go. So if we set that up now, we've already set up the first controller. Steer, stop. We'll have that off, on, and trigger when we release a thruster. So now left does that, and releasing the button resets it. And you can see those timers firing and triggering. So we just need to do the same thing for the right hand side. So steer right. So steer left was everything at the front decreasing, everything at the back increasing, so we do the opposite. Everything at the front will increase steer override. And everything at the back will decrease steer override. And then that will trigger itself. And then we've set up this controller to do thrust greater than 50% steer right controller. And then we want to turn on and turn off the steer right timer and trigger it. And then turn off and turn on the stop timer and trigger it when we release a thruster. So now we've got a right, we've got a left, and it stops and resets when we release either key. We got a forwards, we got a backwards. Let me cut it all down. We might need a little bit more battery power for our thrusters, but we can find that out now when we test it. Yeah, it needs a little bit more thruster power, battery power, so we'll just slap an extra one on the back, and there you go. It drives, it steers. And see, this is one of the problems I encountered whilst messing with this kind of system. As you can see, these control thrusters are firing at different rates, and that is something to do with the override controllers being at the same level. Like if they've got the same thrust override, so what I usually do is offset one by a little bit, and there you go. The thrust controllers are now both outputting at the same level, which is why those turn controls are being a little bit janky then. That's probably also a grip issue as well, but yeah. Forwards, left, right, reverse. Now, if we want a handbrake as well, because there is a way of making a handbrake, because my gun tank yes, I do, yes. That is pretty much exactly right, Dr. Headbong. There is an event controller that is being triggered by that thruster. The reason for the override is with your inertial dampening set on your pilot seat, the inertial dampening on the thrusters will fire when you move around in different directions, and that will cause the event controllers to trigger when you don't want them to, and you'll start driving and turning and doing all sorts of mad stuff when you don't want to. So if you add a little bit of thrust override on the same axis as the control thrusters, it stops them doing anything when they aren't being given direct controller input, and that prevents any unwanted things being triggered. And that is pretty much entirely how this thing works. Because the control systems for this gun tank are entirely vanilla. It drives forwards, it drives in reverse. I even tied some lights into the drive controls so you know what direction it's going in. And it can turn left and right as well. And the entire thing... It also has a handbrake that you can see lighting up at the back that's controlled by the spacebar. But all of the systems in here are entirely controlled by... where are they? In the back, are they? There we go. This little thruster setup. That controls everything. Forwards, backwards, left, right, handbrake, the lot. So if you want a handbrake, the only way to get a handbrake assigned to your spacebar is to have another thruster. And the only direction of thrusters that give you a spacebar input is up. So if you stick one up, and if you stick one down, or you can stick another one up somewhere else. It just needs to be on the same axis to have the control thruster, so we'll call that one handbrake thruster control. Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Headbonk. Yeah, I thought it's better than a script. It's more interesting than doing it with a script. I mean, scripts are cool, and I totally appreciate all of the programming knowledge and stuff that goes into them. And it does massively save on weight, because one script block versus all of this extra weight can be quite helpful. Because depending on what block you're playing with, timers are 30 kilos, CTCs are 250, event controllers are nearly 40 kilos, action relays are nearly 85 kilos. So it does add an extra lot of weight and power. But I find it more fun doing it this way. So we've got handbrake control, and we've got handbrake override, because we need something that's not going to mess with us. So now, when I jump in there, you can see me hitting the spacebar, fires that. So we also needed extra battery power on there, because the other one was starting to freak out a bit. So we'll chuck that on. Yeah, it all depends what you want. If you haven't got the space, and you can use script, go for the script. But if you've got the space to play with, you may as well have fun learning some of the more technical side, because at the end of the day, playing with all of these timers and event blocks and all that stuff, it's still coding essentially. It's all still binary actions. It's all still if commands and ones and zeros, positive and negative responses. So it's still coding, just in a much more hands-on kind of way. So for the handbrake, we will need another event controller. And do we need a timer? We'll see what happens. Oh, hang on. I need to name it. Controller, handbrake. So we've got a handbrake controller. That is again going to be thruster triggered, not stored power. Thank you very much. 50% handbrake control thruster up. So when that does things, what we want it to do is we want it to where is it? Oh yes, I think. Yes. Now, this is where things get a little bit more complicated if you want a handbrake, because you don't actually have an action in the. There isn't actually an action related to the suspension blocks in the timers and event controllers that turn on the handbrake. You can turn on and off the ability, like can brake, allow parking brake, but that's not the same thing. So what you actually need to do is stick a remote control block on each of your grids that have got the wheels on them. And brake control FL01. The FR01. Because you can't actually trigger the handbrake from the wheels, but you can trigger them from a pilot seat or a remote control block, which is how the handbrake system on the RTX 4400 gun tank that I was showing you before works. I can go over here and you'll see, where is it? There it is, tucked away in the subgrid is a remote control block. If we go in here and look at our handbrake controls, what they do is trigger the handbrake on and off on those remote control blocks. And it does a whole bunch of other stuff as well, but that's not important. But that is the main thing that it does, is you can turn on and off the handbrake and the park brake from a remote control block, but you can't do it from the suspension. You can only turn off the ability to use those things. So that is why we have the remote control blocks. So now what we need to do handbrake, because we haven't got any lights or any of that nonsense, we don't need to add a timer. Handbrake control, handbrake controllers. So when that thruster fires, we want to turn on the handbrake. When it turns off, we want to turn off that handbrake again. And the handbrake is a difficult thing to know whether it's actually working or not, unless you're actually driving around. So, we'll cut that off, we'll drop that down, drop that off, drop it on the floor, so we can drive around, and if I press the spacebar, it stops, and if I hold the spacebar, you can see me trying to drive forwards, you can see me turning left, but it won't let me drive forwards. As soon as I release that spacebar, off we go. Sorry, I didn't see your messages there. Yeah, it's still the same code. Forward and reverse together might work. What do you mean by that? Because there you go. That's forward. That's reverse. And we've got turning left, turning right, You see all those timers firing as they go. We've got a handbrake control there, firing, and yeah, that's about it. And you might need to tweak some of your thruster settings, depending on how big your and how big your device is. So if we put them up to, say, they have to be over 90. 90. Oh, right, yeah, forward and back might work, but you'd have to work out a way to balance them. Like, you could literally just slam it into forward and reverse to stop, but that's not as fun as actually having a handbrake button. Oh, did I not rename the... Right. Oh, it's called a controller, that's why. So yeah, put that up to 90. Yeah. There you go, that's the... It's not as responsive as using a script or being able to control things subgrid wise properly. You do have to see, occasionally it'll stick while it's figuring as those thrusters turn off. Yeah, hang on. I think I might have messed up one of the turn thrusters. Steer, control, steer, control, steer left, steer. Oh, that's why. There you go. And then we slam the handbrake on, and we come to a stop. And that is pretty much how you do subgrid wheel control, vanilla style. And you can adapt it into as many weird combinations as you want. You can take those timer blocks and tie other functions into them. Like on this one, for example, the forward and drive controls have got a whole separate set of lights in them, so you know which direction you're going in. I've even tied some of those same lights into the control seat, so when I drive forward it goes green, when I drive in reverse it goes orange, when I slam on the handbrake it goes red. And I've got all of those same lights on the outside. And handbrake lights. And that is basically it for subgrid wheel control. I'm going to leave this stream here and then go do something else. Probably go work on another one of my mechs. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And that is how you make an alternative to the script control version. Might turn that back on. Oh, back. Drop them off, but they don't need to be there. They don't need to be there. So, that's your script control version. It's still got a couple of thrusters on the side, which I'm going to chop off. Ah. Yeah, that's script controlled. That's vanilla controlled. They both do same thing. Just one has a tiny little prog block, and the other has all of these to replicate what it does. But yeah, that is basically it for subgrid wheel control. Those systems that I've just shown you can also be applied to other vanilla control systems like thrusters and mech legs, walk cycles and things like that. Anything that you want to trigger using the WASD keys and the keyboard can be set up like that. So yeah, I'm going to leave this stream here for now and go build one of my mechs. And yeah, cheers for watching guys, cheers for chatting, and I'll be adding this one to my research and development playlist for other little tutorial sessions on building vanilla stuff. So yeah, thanks guys, I will see you next time, and cheers for dropping by and cheers for watching. Goodbye for now.